How are you doing, USFL and football fans? This is Blitz Brothers presented by the USFL Network. It is a show where you will find all things USFL fantasy football. As always, we are brought to you by our sponsor, RoyalRetros.com. If you want to get anything retro USFL or any other alternative football league, sports league, go there. They have the best stuff, high quality. We are both wearing our hats from the website. And if you use promo code USFL Network, all one word, at checkout, you can get 10% off your entire purchase. All right. So, as always, I'm Ace. I will be found at PocketAces_USFL on both Twitter and Instagram. And joining me is my brother and USFL trader, Maverick. Maverick, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at PodMyTake1 and wherever you can find the USFL Network.
And wherever you can find the USFL Network is also on the web now. We have dropped our website, usflnetwork.com. We have a specific fantasy football tab on the page. And if you go to it, you'll see updates on our show and articles that Maverick and I write about fantasy football rankings, players, everything in all of the above. So without further ado, let's get into it. We are talking about
fantasy.
Player rankings. It's preseason. So right now, what people are doing is they're creating leagues, they're starting drafts, and they want to know who they should draft. There's a lot of players that you probably don't know in this league if you haven't followed every single different IFL, AAF, TSL, all the different leagues. So we're here to kind of shed some light and help you at least with the top players at each position. So let's start with QB rankings. Probably the easiest one, and the one that you wrote an article about that can be found on the website. So I'll let you take it away and give your rankings.
That's right. You can find it at our website. So I'm going to start off with the quarterback I'm most excited about, the quarterback that I think should be the favorite to win the whole league. And it's because of the team that has been put around this player. It's almost like the Avengers are assembling. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Oh my gosh. Are you talking about Brian Scott?
I'm talking about Brian Scott. So Scott is obviously a polished quarterback, but his coach basically redrafted his star team who won a championship. They've already done it. Now they're coming back for more. And Brian Scott, he's done it. He's been the MVP. He's a poised quarterback. Got the accuracy, got the touch, got the power. I think his resume backs the hypothesis that he's the best quarterback, and I think he should be the first quarterback gone in a fantasy draft.
No, I agree. It was the Generals, actually same logo and stuff for the USFL because the TSL was owned by Fox. He was on the Generals. They got DeAndre Holland, Jordan Sewell. They got all of their people back, including their center, Sean Brown, who we just interviewed on the show. Great guy. And I think you're right. He was the only quarterback to throw over 1,000 yards that season. It's a condensed season. They went undefeated, won the championship, and now they're back for more, just like you said. And I completely agree.
Yeah, I think it's a safe pick to take him first as your fantasy quarterback. Now, coming in second is probably the quarterback with the most excitement around him. He's a lethal dual threat quarterback. He made his name in the XFL. Of course, I'm talking about Jordan Ta'amu. So obviously he's got the possibility of racking up tons of fantasy points with his legs, which is extra points more than throwing, but also his arm. The guy has a cannon. I mean, and then talk about the wide receiver core around him. They've got speed. I mean, they're going to definitely extend the field. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not to mention they have Todd Haley as a head coach who's just going to be slinging it everywhere, being as creative as possible with the new rules in the USFL.
Oh, yeah. I think the ceiling for Ta'amu is so high. I think arguably you could take him one or two interchangeably with Scott.
I mean, I will stick with Scott, but sure.
Yeah, I think I definitely have Scott as the favorite to win it all, but I really like Ta'amu as my fantasy quarterback as well. So moving on to number 3, and this is probably, I have a little bias here because I drafted him in our fantasy league, is Kyle Sloter. Sorry.
Yeah.
So he is an NFL veteran. He's been around the league. And he's actually played really well in preseasons when he does start. I mean, he's a dream of a backup quarterback, come in, game manager, and now he's coming into a starting role at in a, yes, it's no longer the NFL, but that might bode well for him. So his coach is actually a quarterback's coach, which I think could definitely help him develop and really, refine his skills and what he may have been lacking as an NFL quarterback, and maybe make it back to the NFL if he has a good enough season here in the USFL. So I'm pretty excited about Kyle Slaughter on my team, and I think the Breakers have a lot to be excited about, and any fantasy owner has a lot to be excited about if they draft Kyle Slaughter.
Well, I didn't get him on my fantasy team, so I'm not as excited about him as you are. But all right, who's your number 4?
You took an interesting approach to the draft. We'll get there.
I did.
We'll get there. So number 4, I've got, as you called him, the hair, Alex Magoo.
Dude, the flow is beautiful.
So, like many of the quarterbacks in the USFL, he bounced around the NFL. He actually was one of the only quarterbacks in the USFL right now who was actually drafted. Most of them went undrafted by the Seattle Seahawks. So he did spend most of his career, maybe all of it, on practice squads. So it's hard to know exactly where his talent is. But if his college is any indicator, I think the Stallions have a lot to look forward to. And the wide receivers they put around him, they have a lot of size. I think they're going to be absolutely deadly in the red zone. So I think he's going to have a lot of upside in fantasy. Obviously, he's not a top 3, in my opinion, but I think there's a lot of upside there.
No, I agree. And if anything, you at least have the quarterback with the best hair, like I said. So.
Absolutely. So coming in 5, just below average. I know it kills you, but we have Clayton Thorson of the Houston Gamblers. And honestly, I think I'm talking myself into liking him more and more every time I talk about him.
I think that's kind of the consensus that everybody has said. They say, I wasn't excited about Thorson, and then the more I look into him, the more I talk about him, I'm talking myself into Thorson.
Yeah. I mean, he just fits the scheme perfectly. The more you research his college background, the more explosive it seems to be. I mean, he's the only Big Ten quarterback to throw for 10,000 yards and rush for 20 rushing touchdowns. So, I mean, yes, 20 rushing touchdown in a 4-year career. That's not a ton of rushing touchdowns, but that is a possibility of getting rushing touchdowns in fantasy. That's huge. I mean, that's what makes Jordan Thomas so effective, is that possibility of running. So he's got a little bit of that dual threat capability. I mean, obviously not as much as some other quarterbacks, but it's definitely there. And I'm interested to see if this gamble pays off.
Oh, we said it. All right.
See if you catch it.
Oh, of course. And then number 6.
6, we have Kyle Laletta. So I think he's a lot like Thorson. I mean, he has a lot of upside. He's a very young, talented quarterback. I think the Maulers have a lot to make up for in kind of one of the weaker, I think you would agree with me, a weaker draft. Yeah. Compared to some other teams. I think they have a lot to make up for. I think they're going to be down a lot, which bodes well for quarterbacks. So I don't think you get down on yourself if you draft Kyle Laletta. Sorry. I think there is a lot of good that could come from his fantasy value.
That's fair.
Especially as a young quarterback that's going to develop throughout the season.
Yeah. And I mean, while they are saying they're going to be the running team, you can't literally run every play. It's unless you're super good at it. I think you have to throw. And, with red zone, they have big receivers and he's a tall quarterback who can throw good fades. So there's always a possibility of getting a lot of red zone passing yards and touchdowns. But then number 8 on your list, or 7. Are we at 7?
No, we're at 8.
We're at 8. Okay.
No, 7. Sorry, 7.
Dang it.
All right, I was getting excited about my team.
Okay. Okay, so number 7, this one, I was right
Yeah.
though on my point. It gets a little interesting because of some roster moves before the season.
Right. So Ben Holmes is no longer in the USFL, which makes it very interesting to see what the Generals are going to do come week 1, because now they've picked up Luis Perez, who has had much less time than the other starting quarterbacks to get ready for the season, to figure out his playbook. So I think he's an interesting gamble to go into a fantasy season with. I think he's got a lot of upside, but there is a lot of downside with his lack of experience here now that he hasn't had as much practice time as the other quarterbacks. He hasn't gotten that chemistry with all of his players since Ben Holmes effectively took half of the possible time to get ready for the season.
True, and then he broke his toe, which is just the worst thing that I think could
Yeah.
happen to a player. Like, you can't play through a broken toe.
Right.
But like you said, Luis Perez, he has a good rap sheet. When you look, he played in the AAF. He was on the Birmingham Iron. Then he was on the Guardians in the XFL, and he didn't play much. He came in as a backup, and then he lit it up and took the spot. So he is good. He has a good ceiling, but like you said, he didn't get to prepare. So I think there might even be a higher chance that DeAndre Johnson comes out week 1, which
Yeah.
I think could be a better fantasy pick, honestly.
Yeah, but it's also taking a risk on who you think is going to start.
It is taking a risk. You can kind of draft either one, and you have a possibility of getting a starting quarterback either way. But talking about a 2-quarterback system,
Yeah, my number 8 and 9 is a combination of Paxton Lynch and Shea Patterson, which makes me very upset to say because I am a Michigan Panthers fan. So you know that this paper was written with, or this list was written without any bias, considering my quarterbacks are last.
They are both last.
We have Shea Patterson and Paxton Lynch, which disappoints me to say will be splitting time. And I am not a fan of splitting time. I currently go to Baylor University, and we're notorious for having quarterback split time, and it never works out. And I can't imagine the USFL is going to be any different. I don't think drafting either of them is a good idea unless you go the ace route and you wait to take a quarterback until really late because they're the only ones available.
Shea Patterson was my first quarterback taken, and he was my last pick in the draft.
That's right. So you did get a stacked running back room, which bodes well for your season.
Which is great. So hopefully we'll post an episode soon going over, draft strategy, and we'll write articles on it. I see upside to what I did and also downside, mostly being I got the quarterback I didn't want, but I got all the running backs that I did want. And speaking of running backs, we will now move on to running back rankings. So there's kind of an overwhelming theme over the lists in the fact that the number 1 or 2 player on each of our rankings is a star, but that's okay. So my number 1 running back was Devion Smith, who pulled a Ben Holmes. Although we haven't heard of an injury or anything, he is gone from the league. I had him as number 1 because the Maulers, they drafted huge alignment. They've been saying since day one, they're doing a ground and pound Pittsburgh offense. They're going to be running the ball. And so I thought he would just have a crazy workload. And with how he played in the XFL, he was the best running back in the XFL. So I was super excited. And then he was dropped from the team. So I'm just going to pull an audible, and I'm going to say number 1 is still the Maulers, but it's going to be Madre London. Madre London, he played in the ELF, the European Football League, and he was their MVP last year. He had over 2,000 yards, something like 25 touchdowns, and I watched his highlights. It's not just that he was playing in Europe and maybe they had less talent. The guy is just that talented. So I think he easily replaces Devion Smith as my number 1 pick. So if Madre London is there in the draft, I say don't wait on him. I wouldn't worry about it. ELF or not, I think he is still a great running back to have in your room, especially because the Maulers only have 2 running backs. So only 2 running backs. He can only split time with 1 other guy, whereas other teams have 3, in which case maybe they're rotating a little bit more. And that lowers fantasy points because you're not getting as much of the workload. So I think Madre London takes the cake, still number one. Number two, though, is the Stars running back, Darnell Holland. Darnell Holland, like you said about Brian Scott, was on the TSL Generals team. He went in the undefeated season. He won the championship with Brian Scott, with Bart Andrus, the now Stars head coach. And I think that they're just going to keep rolling. They were an incredibly high-flying offense. Darnell Holland has great hands and basically plays a wide receiver out of the backfield. So if you're in a PPR league, he's got even more potential. I think that he's going to get a huge workload. I think Brian Scott, Bart Andrus, they're already comfortable with him, and I think that they're going to roll with him.
Yeah.
Number three, I have – do what?
I think it's especially valuable that we can be almost certain he's going to be the starter. And I think that can't be said for many people in the USFL.
Yes, that is super helpful. Madre London, he still gets the number one, mostly because they only have two running backs. So whether he's the starter or not, he's still going to get a heavy rotation. Darnell Holland, I think they actually do have three running backs, but you know that Darnell Holland is the starter. He's their guy, and that's why he's still so far up on my list. And then number three is another two running back system, and that's going to be the Tampa Bay Bandits, BJ Emmons. Now, it hurt me because I wanted to put Juwan Washington just because, you know, he's a friend of the show and he did push-ups for me when I won our bet on March Madness. But I think BJ Emmons he brings just a little bit more to the table. You know, and when you have Todd Haley, who's known for running RPOs, who's known for being incredibly creative, getting end rounds, getting all these things, I think that he's going to use BJ Emmons in a lot of different ways and a lot of different ways to get the ball in his hand. So I say it in the article, quantity leads to quality. And I think that he's going to get a lot of touches, especially with just a two running back room. And I think BJ Emmons is a great pick at number three. But then number four, I got to be a homer. I don't know. Yeah, no gamblers made it in the top three of any of our lists, but maybe we'll mediocrity like our way to the championship. But I put Dalen Dawkins of the Houston Gamblers. He's out of Colorado State, so not a huge school, but still D1. And then he played in the preseason for the Tennessee Titans. He was great. The Titans running back coach was hyped on him. We talked to the Gamblers running back coach, JD Runnels, and he said when he talked to the Titans running back coach, like he said, if he didn't have Derrick Henry in that backfield, the next man up was Dalen Dawkins. So I'm super excited for him. When you watch him, he plays like a Madden character. It just doesn't look like a human should move like that. And I think that that's really good. One, because how do you tackle something like that? And two, he just runs really hard. So another guy, he's a dual threat. He can catch passes out of the backfield very well. He's good in open space, great on screens. So I think that he's going to have just a lot of upside. And while they do have three running backs, I think Dalen Dawkins is the bell cow in that backfield. So I feel comfortable with putting him at 4. But then number 5, another three running back team, we have Tony Brooks James of the Stallions. Now, I was talking about Dalen Dawkins. They have three very different running backs that will all play three very different roles. Whereas when you look at the Stallions, I would love to put Tony Brooks James out of Oregon up higher because he is a guy out of the backfield. He can basically line up in the slot and play receiver. He's electric. He played at Oregon, and he reminds me of LaMichael James, another guy that was electric out of Oregon. But they have three running backs that are all basically the same player. So when you look at that, there's going to be a heavy rotation, and I just think that the ball is going to be spread around too much. It's almost like never picking Patriots running back because you never know who's going to be the starter that game. I kind of think that's how the Stallions will be. So he fell to 5, but I still think he's a great pickup. I got him way late in the draft. If he's there, I say take him if you're past round 7. And then number 6, another friend of the show who I almost got to do push-ups, your man, Reggie Corbin out of the Michigan Panthers. He played at Illinois. He's so fast. I mean, the guy is great. When you look at their running backs, they have two running backs that physically are almost identical. Right. They play very similar, but Reggie Corbin runs a much faster 40 at, I think I put it in there. I didn't. He runs a 4.46 when Stevie Scott III runs a 4.58. So that is a decent amount of speed difference. And I think that come week 1, even though Stevie Scott was drafted before Reggie Corbin, I think Reggie Corbin will kind of become the leading man in that backfield. Then number 7, Mike Weber out of Ohio State. Another guy on the Generals, or first guy on the Generals. Sorry, I'm getting them confused with the TSL. Mike Weber was amazing at Ohio State. He wasn't even a full starter all the time, and he still put up crazy numbers. The reason he's falling back here is the fact that I think the scheme in the Generals with Mike Riley is going to be that he's passing an overwhelming amount and mostly to wide receivers. So while Mike Weber is a fantastic running back, I just don't think that he's going to have the quantity that you would want to see in a fantasy running back. It's one of those things where they're great in the game, but when you look at their fantasy scores, it's not awesome. So I think he falls a little lower on the list, but I think that if they are able to get him into the passing game a little bit more, he could move up the list. And then my last guy, it's my dark horse. It's my Breakers running back, TJ Logan out of North Carolina. This guy's a beast, absolute beast. He returns the ball, he catches the ball, he runs the ball between the tackles. He does literally everything. The reason he's this low on the list is that he was taken in the supplemental draft by the Breakers. So he wasn't one of their 2 first guys, but who knows? Maybe he wasn't even available in the original draft, because when you listen to Fedora talk about him, he's super high on this guy. He loves TJ Logan. So I think that he's kind of a dark horse that not a lot of people have on their draft boards. But if they get him, he could be this year's USFL Cordero Patterson of the NFL last year, where if you had drafted him, you were crazy. And then suddenly he was a top 5 running back. So those are my top 8. From there, we will move on to tight end rankings, which you wrote an article on. I'm yet to read it, but we will be publishing it tonight on the website. So let's hear it.
So I wanted to start out with a little bit of like a fantasy insider tip that we have that no one else has. It occurred during one of our interviews. So the reason my list will not include a Panther running back or tight end is because, according to Chase Demore, edge rusher of the Michigan Panthers, our tight ends cannot catch. They were drafted to be run blockers. So with that being said, there will be formations where Demore actually will come in as a tight end to catch passes in the red zone. So that's a little insider tip. Obviously, we'll get to that a little bit later on where I would rank that. But that will be why none of the Michigan Panthers make my list.
Understandable.
You can check out that interview on the USFL Network website or Twitter, Facebook, or anywhere you can find the USFL Network.
YouTube. And if you subscribe to the YouTube, we do have a giveaway coming up once we hit a certain number. We're still figuring that number out, but do it.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So at number 1, drafted in the supplemental draft, brother of Chaz Surratt, drafted to the Minnesota Vikings, we have Sage Surratt of the Birmingham Stallions. So there is a lot of mystery around Sage Surratt, this Wake Forest alum. And since his start at Wake Forest, he has been a star. I mean, he was the ACC Rookie of the Week. Half the time he was playing, he was the ACC Receiver of the Week. I mean, this guy just demands the ball. In his college career, he went for 66 receptions, 1,001 yards, and 11 touchdowns in 9 starts in his senior year. I mean, this guy is electric. I think there's a lot to look forward to for the Birmingham Stallions. And in a kind of hazy tight end position here in the USFL, he's one of the only ones that I think has a firm starting position for the Stallions. And I do understand that he's going to be splitting time with Carrie Angeline. They're both really good tight ends, but I think he's going to be the starter. I mean, this guy, he's a ball magnet, catches so many passes. I think he's going to be a very big flex. And even if you have a tight end position, you have to have him. I think he could go in as a flex.
No, I agree. And the Surratt family are physical freaks.
Oh, yeah.
Chaz Surratt, who was drafted, he was drafted by the Vikings, like you said. He was a quarterback, and then he transitioned to linebacker because he could just do that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then Chaz Surratt Sage Surratt
Surratt.
played wide receiver and then
Right.
got bigger and just transitioned to tight end because he's like, no, just do that. And
Yeah,
that's great.
so most of the tight ends are going to be tight end to receiver to tight end or receiver to tight end. But so a couple of guys will be really good receivers. And that's why actually after doing this article, I'm kind of sad I didn't draft a tight end.
Some of them go hard.
Yeah, some of them are really good. So at number 2, I put the bug is back. Bug Howard reported to training camp. I am excited to see Bug Howard. I know he's a little on the older side. He's been around the league, the NFL, and he never quite established a starting role. It's been a long time since he's been a starter, but he's a big receiver. I mean, he's not a big tight end, but he's a big receiver, which bodes well for fantasy. That means he's not going to be a run blocker. I mean, they may use him that way, but I think he's going to be catching a lot of passes. He only missed 2 games in his college career, and in his college career, he only dropped 4 passes in 4 seasons. I mean, this guy, there's a big chance of boom and not a chance of bust. I like Bug Howard. I'm pretty big on this guy. I think the Stars got a good pick in Bug Howard. And I'm excited
adding to their championship team.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited that he showed up. I was a little upset. I think we all were a little upset that he didn't show up.
Yeah, everybody was talking about, Ben Holmes and Devion Smith. And I was like, guys, Bug Howard didn't report to training camp.
Right.
Why is no one talking about this? But yeah, I'm glad he's back too.
So at number 3, I know I already talked about a tight end for the Stallions, but I had to fit in another tight end because I left off the Panthers. And so I like Carrie Angeline. I know he's going to be splitting time, but I can see some 2 tight end packages in their future. I mean, these guys are so good. This guy was a basketball player, so he's got crazy athleticism. And all the scouts said that they could see his basketball skills in his pass catching abilities. So at NC State, this guy was 5th nationally in receiving touchdowns. I mean, he earned his spot on multiple NFL teams. And obviously, it didn't work out for any of those teams, but now he's landed here in the USFL. And I think there's a lot to look forward to. At number 4, we've got Matt Sabert of the Pittsburgh Maulers.
Another friend of the show.
That's right. And
he was an earlier interview.
I think he's a very talented guy with a lot of potential. I think that the Maulers, I don't want to say that they don't have a lot of weapons because we don't know a lot about the USFL. There are still so many things up in the air, but I want to say that the Maulers seem weakest at the big threat for big plays, and I think Matt Sabert could be a big target.
I think he told it's Siebert. It's spelled weird,
Siebert,
but I think it's Siebert. Yeah.
Siebert. So I know he only averaged 3 catches his senior year at Michigan State, but and granted that's not enough to prove that he belongs on the USFL, but at the combine, the guy exploded. I mean, he was 1st in bench press, and I think he was 3rd. I want to say 3rd. I don't want to get that wrong, but I want to say he was 3rd in the 3-cone drill. And it was, I don't think he was really on many scouts' radars. And just from exploding at the combine, he got on all of them, and he got a spot in the NFL. And I mean, now obviously, like almost all of the players, it didn't work out in the NFL, and he's here in the USFL. And I'm excited to see his progression throughout the season.
No, I agree. I think he's probably one of their biggest playmakers they have on their offense.
Right. And I think at this point in my list, I would say if you don't have a tight end position in your roster, I personally would not take a tight end after the first 4 guys. I think it gets really iffy from this point on whether or not there's going to be a huge value for these tight ends.
Well, good thing I drafted Sage Surratt. So
yeah, I think that's going to be a good pick. So at number 5, I went with Nicholas Truesdale for the Generals. So I like him more than Bowman and Williams, and that's why I have him on my list. But it really could be any of the three at starter. And I think that's a big pullback for me at this point on why I wouldn't take a tight end anymore. But Truesdale had success in the XFL. I mean, he had 3 starts and he had 9 catches and 90-ish yards. So he was averaging 3 catches, 30 yards a game, and I believe he had a touchdown. So there's definitely fantasy value, and I think 3 games isn't enough to get into a groove. And I said this in the article, that's not enough to get into a groove. I would like to see what a full season could do for Nicholas. So he's one of those players that I'd like to see prove himself, but I'm still excited about him. And I think he could be a good pickup, especially as like a waiver pickup throughout the season. I think he could definitely have value, especially if you draft players that all of a sudden aren't starters or aren't getting the ball at all. So at number 6, I'm going to go with your guy, Houston Gambler, Brandon Barnes.
Let's go.
So it's pretty hard to find anything on this guy, which is a little scary when trying to draft a fantasy player. But he did play in the XFL, and his statistics in the XFL weren't great, but he did have a season-ending injury. So, there's still a lot up in the air about him. So I think he's going to be the starter for the Houston Gamblers. I mean, again, this is pretty low on my list, but I think he's going to be your everyday man. He averages 3 catches, 30 yards as well. I mean, I don't think he's ever had a game with less than 2 catches in his career. So I think he's going to be a safe play to get fantasy points. So at number 7, I know a lot of people are high on him. I'm not so high on him. I think this is probably my most controversial pick is Cheyenne O'Grady of the Tampa Bay Bandits. Yeah. So I think a lot of people have him really high. And their tight end room is so similar. And who knows who's going to be the starter week 1. And O'Grady just lacked any kind of outbreak in his XFL career. I mean, he averaged 1 catch a game. I know his career at Arkansas was pretty good, and that does give me hope for this Bandits tight end. But until he proves himself, I don't believe the hype that he's going to be a top 3 tight end. So at number 8, another supplemental pick who I think is actually their most valuable tight end is the New Orleans Breakers' E.J. Bibbs.
That's a good pick.
Yeah. And so I think I put him into my lists, top 8 tight ends, because I think he could be, if you have a tight end in your roster or if you're in an 8-man league, because I know 8-man leagues, the players go quick. I think he could be a sneaky pick out of Iowa State. At Iowa State, he had 84 catches, 844 yards, and 10 touchdowns. So, and that was in 2 seasons as a Cyclone. So, I mean, he's definitely got the stats to back it up. He did get drafted to the XFL for the Guardians, and he only caught 6 passes in 5 starts. So I would go the same route of he hasn't gotten into his groove. I don't think you can say he got into his groove yet. And so I think a full season would be pretty exciting to see what E.J. Bibbs does. And so I put in a bonus on this list. Number 9, Chase Demore. I think, obviously, so he's not going to be available in your drafts. He is not listed as a tight end. So I think he's going to be a sneaky pickup that could win you a fantasy season. So if he comes in, and the way he was talking about it seems like he's like the goal line tight end because he's the only one with hands.
Yeah.
And so even if he's only in for, 6 snaps a game, if he gets 3 targets in the end zone, he only has to catch one of those to have instant fantasy value. And I mean, depends on how his hands are. I've never really seen it, but I imagine he's going to catch one of those 3 passes. And I think at like a deep flex position, he could do some damage in a fantasy season.
Well, actually, he got one of the things that he's famous for on TikTok is that he puts
Oh,
up
right.
videos of him catching balls while doing gymnastics and stuff on
Gymnastics? That's right,
trampolines.
yeah.
Yeah.
I remember saying
So I
that.
think his hands are good enough.
Mhm.
I haven't seen him catch balls in a game before,
Right.
in a TSL or anything, but I think you're right. If they do kind of dual position him and let him be a defensive end, tight end, and bring him into the fantasy rosters, I think he would be a sneaky waiver pickup, especially later in the season when injuries start happening. I think that he would be a great pickup.
Right. That's what I was saying at number 9. And I wanted to throw that in as a little bonus. Not only did he give us the tip, but I also threw him in as a bonus.
Well, look at that. We truly are friends of the players that we interview.
Yeah.
We always have their back. We're a little biased, not too
Maybe there
much.
is a little bias. Well, I don't know why I would have any
Oh
bias.
my gosh. You're ridiculous.
I know. I'm a Panther for life.
But a list that I have no biases on because probably the position I know the least about, but obviously got into it to do these rankings was wide receivers. But sticking with our overwhelming theme, my number one wide receiver is going to be Jordan Sewell, the 6'5",
Yeah.
6'6", 205 wide receiver who runs a 4.49 40-yard dash for the Philadelphia Stars. He's another guy. He was on the TSL Generals. He won the championship with them, went through the undefeated season. Brian Scott loved throwing to this guy, and why
Right.
wouldn't you? He's a textbook prototype deep threat wide receiver. He's 6'6" and fast. I think immediately game one, he's going to show fantasy production. I think Brian Scott is going to target him, and he's going to target him often. And I think he's going to be the guy. If you could get Jordan Sewell in this draft, especially now that what's his name? He's gone from the league,
Eli
gone from my
Rogers.
mind. Do what?
Eli Rogers?
Eli Rogers. Eli Rogers, I don't think he even showed up to training camp. So since he's not in the league, he was the predominant number one that everybody had. I think Jordan Sewell took it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a really good first pick. And I think in our fantasy draft, he didn't even go top 2, I want to say.
No, I think the number one wide receiver that was taken is actually my number 2 wide receiver, Shawn Poindexter for the New Orleans Breakers. Another guy, he's a prototype wide receiver. He's just what you're looking for if you're just straight up looking at a guy, not necessarily how he plays or anything. If you're looking at a guy and you say, that's what I want my wide receiver to look like, it's Jordan Sewell and Shawn Poindexter. Shawn Poindexter is 6'5", 212 pounds. He's a little beefier than Jordan Sewell. And the guy, he's so good in the red zone. I think the thing I looked at him, he's not as fast as someone like Jordan Sewell. And so when people look at receivers, they immediately look at speed. But what I love about him is the fact that he has fantastic body control, runs crisp routes, and he's always able to get in the way of the balls and get to somewhere where he can catch it. And I think when you have a quarterback like Kyle Sloter in New Orleans, who's going to be throwing on the run, who's going to be getting pressured, the ball's not always going to be where you want it to be. And I think that if you're throwing up a jump ball and you want a guy who's going to be better than a 50-50 chance, Shawn Poindexter is going to be that guy. And I'd put money on the fact that Sloter, he's probably already showing some favoritism in training camp throwing at Shawn Poindexter. So he's going to be in my number 2. The guy's going to get a lot of passes.
Yeah,
but number 3,
bonus points for that awesome name.
yeah, Shawn Poindexter, so cool.
Oh, yeah.
But number 3, this is kind of my Hail Mary pick. So I put him at 3, but I think he could break out and be huge in this league. Is John Franklin III out of FAU, EMCC, and Florida State University. The guy bounced around a lot. He had some problems, but he's a physical freak. He's 6'1", 185, and he runs a 4.19 40, which is just absolutely bonkers considering the fact that he used to play quarterback, and that's how he got into Florida State, EMCC, and Auburn. Sorry, he's all over the place. So he was a quarterback there, and then he realized that his ceiling wasn't as high as he wanted to be, and he decided to move to wide receiver because when you can run like that, you can play anywhere on the field. And he's actually very good at wide receiver. He has better hands than you'd expect from a guy transitioning to the position. He his routes aren't as great, but with that speed, I mean, you can make up for it and you can create space. But also, the reason that he jumps up so high on my list is that the USFL has created the rule you can have 2 forward passes behind the line of scrimmage. That is crazy. I've never seen that in a football league. And if you have a wide receiver who literally used to play quarterback, why would you not take advantage of that rule and create a couple different plays where you're throwing it to him and he's launching it to a guy who's already downfield? So not only does he have PPR, he's going to get a point per reception, he's going to get receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. He has the opportunity to get some throwing touchdowns, which is just added points on top, and shot him up my fantasy list to number 3. Then number 4, I have Victor Bolden Jr. for the Birmingham Stallions. Out of Oregon State University, he's the first receiver that I have on the list under 6 foot. He's only 5'8", but I love that because I'm not even 5'8". So I love the little guy, but he plays anything but small. The guy is really fast. In the NFL, he never took off, but he did have great showings as a returner. He had 3 returns against the Seahawks in a week 2 regular season game, and in 3 returns, he had 70 yards. So it wasn't like he was just catching fair catches back there. And in the USFL, another player that is helped by the rule changes is that the USFL is showing that instead of touchbacks, they want people to return the ball, which means that Victor Bolden Jr. is not only getting receiving yards and catches and touchdowns in the passing game, he also can add fantasy value in the return game. And that's a big reason that I moved him up to number 4. I think the guy's electric. I think, especially in the Skip Holtz offense, Skip Holtz loves marching down the field quickly, but also just going small pass after small pass. And if you're doing wide receiver screens, swing routes, just little crossers over the middle, slants, Victor Bolden Jr. is your guy. So I think he's getting a lot of balls. Like, he's going to have huge quantity and a big workload, and he's going to be a great fantasy receiver. Now, number 5, in the middle of the pack, where literally everybody on the team I root for is, I have Isaiah Zuber of the Houston Gamblers. He's out of Kansas State, transferred senior year to Mississippi State. Now, he went undrafted in the draft, and I think part of that is that he transferred to Mississippi State. The chemistry wasn't there. He didn't have as great a season, but he put up over 3,000 yards receiving in his first 3 years at Kansas State. The guy was great. Not only that, he's also a great returner, just like Victor Bolden Jr. But now that he's been drafted, he got a decent amount of NFL time, actually. I would consider him kind of a Kyle Sloter type, but younger, much younger than Kyle Sloter. So he's still got the youth. He's still got the energy and the athleticism. And now he's in a Sumlin offense that's going to be just absolutely creative, and they're going to be using him in every way possible. So I think he's a great pick. And if you're choosing between him and Victor Bolden, and you're a Gamblers fan like me, maybe just pick Isaiah Zuber just to be a homer. And then my 6th pick, and the last one that I actually wrote the description and bio about for the article, because I ran out of a little bit of time for the interview with Sean Brown, is Kevontae Turpin. You know, like you said earlier, we're Baylor guys. I graduated, you're there, and we watched a lot of Kevontae Turpin back when he was at TCU. They play Baylor every year. They're our biggest rivals. The dude is a headache. He's a deep threat. He's fast. And I think he is perfect. It makes perfect sense that the Generals took him as their first overall pick at wide receiver, because Mike Riley loves throwing vertically. And if you want to throw vertically, why would you not draft the predominant deep threat that is Kevontae Turpin? So I think he might not get as many passes to him as other receivers on my list will, but when he does, it's going for the money shot. They're going for the touchdown. And I think that gives him great fantasy value, but he could be a boomer bust kind of guy. So don't take my word entirely on it. Don't come at me about it if you pick him, but I think he's good. And then my number 7 is Quincy Adeboyejo out of the Panthers. I believe he's my first Panther on the list, and it's just because he's a big wide receiver. Shea Patterson, I think, especially if you have a 2-quarterback system, they're going to go to guys they trust rather than trying to spread it out. And I think that they're going to trust Quincy Adeboyejo. Pray I got that right. I think he's going to be their guy. And then last on my list, number 8, I have Devin Gray of the Stars. If Jordan Sewell didn't already have all of the chemistry with Brian Scott, And with Bart Andrus, I would say that Devin Gray would be their number one. The guy is so fast. He's an electric receiver with great hands. But because they have Jordan Sewell, he falls to number 8. And I don't know if you noticed, but I don't have a single mauler on this list because I do think if you're going for someone in the passing game on the maulers, Matt Siebert's your guy, just like you said.
Right.
So I believe that if you're going in this league drafting, I wouldn't specifically take multiple receivers from the same team. But if you had to, the Stars, I would take a Stars receiver, almost any of them, over taking backups on other teams.
I don't know if you noticed in my preseason rankings, but for one of my, I think my rising star or most likely to go to the NFL, I put Brendan Eagles out of Texas. I don't know if you remember watching him play against Baylor, but that guy is electric. I can't believe the Stars have so many. They just have so much talent in that wide receiver core. I just can't see them losing.
Did I not put Brendan Eagles on here? Yeah, I didn't even put him on the list. That's how much talent they have. It's ridiculous.
They're so deep at wide receiver.
Because I have down to number 16, and the only reason Brendan Eagles isn't on the top 16 is because he has 2 wildly good wide receivers in front of him, and one who Brian Scott already knows and is comfortable with.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are our rankings. It's the preseason. We don't know what's going to happen, but this is our best guess. We are in 2 fantasy football leagues for the USFL. One we've already drafted for, and we have put together a whole list of tips for drafts. And we are going to bring you a show. Our next show, we're going to give draft tips, draft strategies, and maybe we'll even show our fantasy football team. So once you draft, you can compare them. But for us here at the USFL Network, I've been Ace. This is my little brother.
Sorry about that.
Go for it.
I'm Maverick.
And we are the Blitz Brothers. Thank you for watching.